So you'll notice in this month that the spiritual battle is trying to get you out of alignment. That's where you'll hear a lot of testimonies of people saying, well, I really wanted to get in alignment with God's timing this month, but I had so many things come up to disrupt and sabotage that. Well, that's probably the enemy and God using it to test them, but the enemy coming in, it's, if you look it up and find the territories where in Joshua and places where the tribes went in, the principalities that Issachar battled will correspond to all of that. So it's deep. I'm only giving you an overview. And then, like I said, tonight at sundown, you get Sivan, which Sivan is the tribe of Zebulun. So there's a verse in Exodus, which is Exodus 19. So this is on the first day of Sivan, which starts tonight at sundown, but is actually would be considered mostly tomorrow during the day, right? So this event in Exodus 19:2, it took place on the first of Sivan, and it wouldn't have been at night; it would have been in the daylight. So we're talking corresponding to tomorrow during the daylight, the first of Sivan. So they departed from Rephidim and were come to the desert of Sinai and had pitched in the wilderness, and there Israel camped before the mount. Now it's talking about Mount Sinai because we're coming up to Shavuot or Pentecost, and that holiday is the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. So the first of Sivan, what they call Rosh Chodesh, the head of the month, Israel moves. They journeyed. They were told to move by the Lord, and they departed from where they were, and they came to Sinai on the first of Sivan. So there's a big hint as to how this month is entering a new season, and it's preparing the way for Pentecost coming up. And there's something that the rabbis look at here, and this is a really good example of looking at the Hebrew grammar and getting meaning out of the Hebrew grammar. So there's verbs here. They departed is nasa. I could show you in the Hebrew in a minute, but the way it's conjugated is in the plural. And they were come, which is the word bo. If you've ever heard the word bo in Hebrew, means to come. That's conjugated again in the plural. And then they came to Sinai and they pitched. Now, pitched is an interesting Hebrew word, and this is plural again, but it's the word Hannah. If you've ever heard the Bible character Hannah, this is her name, and it means grace. So when they talk about grace in the New Testament, if you want to know what the corresponding Hebrew word for grace is, it's Hannah. And talking about root words and how out of that root word, you'll usually get a concrete meaning, but you also get action. You'll get different actions in different words. So you get Hannah, which is favor, grace, I should say, but it comes out of the concrete meaning of to pitch a camp, to pitch a tent, and in the old days they had the wagon trains, and at night they would make a circle and they'd set up a perimeter of protection. When I was in the Army, we did the same thing. When we'd go set up a camp, we'd set up a triangle shape, a perimeter with 3 points, guard posts, and then we'd plant, around the perimeter defenses and watchmen and so forth. And that's the idea here. They pitched a camp is they set up that circle, that wagon train, right? So they pitched a camp, and that's the idea of Hana, the Hebrew word for grace, is a secure place. It's a place that's defended. It's a place that there's a hedge of protection around you, that perimeter, you see. And so Hana, the word picture in Hebrew, Hana is your hedge of protection. When you're under grace, you see you have a perimeter around you of protection, and within that, on the inside of that camp or that perimeter, you have a safe spot, and that's what the Hebrew calls grace. But here's the interesting thing I was going to bring up here is you get plural departed, plural come, plural pitched or Hana, and there Israel camped. Now this is where the King James does a disservice, I think, but at any rate, because this word pitched is Hana, and if you look at the word camped, guess what word it is? Hana, the same exact Hebrew word. So they translate in the same verse, pitched and camped. And the same thing with desert is midbar. It's actually Bamidbar because it's in the desert. And then you get wilderness, right? In the wilderness, Badmidbar, the same exact Hebrew word. So one time they translated desert and the next time wilderness. Remember I was talking about my English teacher saying, hey, spice up your writing and put in a big green car? That's where the translators are bringing that mindset into the story here. These were King James people, and I think the Old English is known for being poetic and flowery and all of that. And so they thought they'd spice it up, I guess. I'm guessing. I wasn't there, but I'm guessing they wanted to flower it up by mixing up the word choice, because to them it sounds. I used to get red marks on my paper for that, actually, by the English teacher, because if I was writing something and I said they were come to the desert and they had pitched in the desert, and there Israel pitched before the mount. And the English teacher would say, well, instead of using pitch twice, why don't you use a close synonym and mix up the word choice and spice it up a little, right? I don't know if you've heard that in your schooling, but I did in the school I went to. They would fault me for that and say, well, you're supposed to have a little variety. You don't repeat the same word over and over and over. Well, in the Hebrew, you do. And that's one of the differences between Hebrew and English and Hebrew and Greek. And that's where it starts in Genesis and it goes all through the Hebrew Bible. If you read it in the Hebrew, like I just showed you several verses today, you get these word puns or these plays on Hebrew words where it's the same Hebrew word, sometimes conjugated a little differently, but it's repeated 2, 3, 4 times in the same verse. It'd be very noticeable if we did that in the English. And it's very noticeable in the Hebrew, but it's there intentionally. That's God's writing style. So when we get a verse like in Matthew, where he says, they name the child Yeshua because the child will save his people from their sins. In the Hebrew, it makes sense because it's one of those Hebrew word puns. They named him Yeshua because he will yasha, right? It's the same root word, it's just conjugated a little differently. So they named him singer because he will sing, right? In the English, it would be almost too much. It's too much of a word pun. You'd probably get a red mark from the English teacher. It's too, I don't know what the word is for, too obvious, too vulgar, not refined enough, right? So in the Hebrew, it reads that way, and you lose it in the translation. And I noticed in the King James, although, as I've told people, it's one of my favorite English translations, that's one area that I would have done differently, is gotten the Hebrew flavor and not been ashamed to translate it more literally with the Hebrew word puns, which happen over and over and over and over. And when you read something like 1 Samuel in the Hebrew, and you've been reading these word puns, and the story introduces with this, you're probably very familiar if you've read the Bible in English. Now there was a man of such and such a place, of such and such a place, and his name was such and such, and he was the son of such and such, and the son of such and such, and so on, right? And then it says, and he had 2 wives, and the name, Shem, of the one was Hannah. Now, if you've been reading it in Hebrew, and you're like, they went and they Hanad in the wilderness, and then they Hanad next to Sinai, and then they Hanad this and Hanad that, and then you see this word Hana, you're like, oh, okay, you're getting the association, right? Likewise, if I said in the Bible, the Lord is my shepherd, or my Father who art in heaven, right? You would fill in the rest, and you would place it. Oh, that's the Lord is my shepherd is Psalm 23, or you would say, well, that's the Lord's prayer, and so forth. So in the Hebrew, when you come to a passage like 1 Samuel, where it says her name was Hannah, in Hebrew thinking, what you're defining there, remember, these are prophetic. They're prophetic not just in how she was named as a child, but in the meaning of the spiritual meaning of this story. It's given you a prophetic picture, a clue to what the story is about. And when in Hebrew ears, when you hear the name was Hannah, you say, oh, the story is about a woman who her name means grace. Her name means favor. Her name means she's in that blessed perimeter inside that, right? She's favored by God. Well, favored by God in Hebrew thinking means to be fruitful and to have many children, right? And then it says the Lord had shut up her womb, right? So that's ironic in the Hebrew. Her name means Hannah is grace, which would suggest that she's going to have a blessing and lots of children and so forth. She's under the favor of the Lord. And yet here, ironically, she has the opposite. In the Hebrew, there's an undercurrent of something by the word choice, by the familiarity with those Hebrew words. So when you get Exodus 19, and what's interesting, let's go back to that, is this second word, Hannah, camped, is singular. So you get they departed, plural, because the verbs in Hebrew are conjugated as singular or plural. So in the Hebrew, it's they departed, plural. They were come, plural. They had pitched, plural, same word, Hannah. But then when it uses the word Hannah here, and Hanad before the mount, all of a sudden Hannah is in the singular form. So that's an example where you get something hidden in the Hebrew that you wouldn't see in the English unless you really dig. So you get 4 verbs in the verse, and it's all the same context. So it's talking about Israel. So Israel, plural, journeyed. Israel, plural, came. So they left, journeyed, right? They pitched, or Hanad, they camped at their new destination in the wilderness, plural. And then all of a sudden, you find an anomaly. It uses that same word, they pitched or camped in front of Sinai. And then it becomes singular. So there's a hint in the Hebrew. You get this a lot in the Hebrew, where you get a pattern established and then you get an anomaly. And the anomaly is pointing our attention to a spiritual lesson that's in that verse. And the spiritual lesson, but what God's not encouraging is the Greek thinking. Remember, I use that expression a lot. It's 3/4 of wisdom is asking the right questions, and 1/4 of wisdom is getting the answers to your questions. So right from the beginning, when God said, Adam, where are you? He's not asking a question out of scientific curiosity, that he's trying to determine scientifically what Adam's location is. Give me your longitude and latitude and give me the details of where you're at. But he's asking a spiritual question, Adam, where are you? And it's like I would say as a parent, if I said to my child, why didn't you do your homework? Well, I know they didn't do their homework. I'm not trying to get scientific information. I'm trying to express something as a heart connection. We have an invitation to relationship, not an invitation to, well, we've got 4 commentaries saying 4 different things, and let's say, well, nobody can really know, and let's just do the Greek style.